Hi, I'm Dr. Gwyn Erwin, and welcome back to my channel, Healing for Your Life. Today we're going to do a kind of wrap-up video that integrates in a very dynamic way the 7 keystones of healthy development. We've taken an in-depth look at each one of those keystones, and even though I have referred to various ones of them and their impact on one another here and there, it's been more in passing and as a reference to guide you to one of the other videos. So today we want to look at how these 7 essential building blocks of development actually interrelate and help build upon one another. So I said in one of the early videos that this developmental model that I created is linear on the one hand, in that there is a certain chronology to development, what's available to a baby in the last months of in utero versus at birth, within the first 3 months, within the first year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and on from there. And so different capacities bloom and as they're supported, and different abilities to make full use of those capacities develops in somewhat of a linear fashion. However, it's also a non-linear, very dynamic process because development isn't even. And we don't develop in lockstep. We don't all develop the same way. We have our own subjective experience, and we have our own relational experience, and we each have our own worlds that we come from. And all of those impact us. And so the way the linear chronology of these keystones comes on board and gets wired into our brain and nervous system also has a very dynamic quality. It's also possible that parents are very good at certain ones of these keystones, but are not as confident or skilled in another. And so what happens with that is that, if you remember the analogy I gave of a brick wall, that's too fixed, but for now we'll use it, where the bricks are not just side by side, but they interlock like this. So there's a similar process with development. So you can have a developmental piece that is coming on board, and let's say that it goes pretty well, and that the child reaches a developmental milestone and has mastery over that. But then another developmental piece, it's time for that to begin to get set and flower, and for a variety of reasons it doesn't go so well. And so the child either has no mastery of that, or only partial mastery, or a deficit in that area. Then when another aspect comes on board, that's going to be influenced by the mastery, the deficit, or the compromise of other developmental milestones. So it's actually a very complex process. And even though I'm trying to break it down into very usable form for you, the complexity can get kind of stunning at certain points. So don't get overwhelmed by it. Try to keep with the essential pieces of it. But do know that the dynamic process of human development is a very complex experience, and it is influenced by multiple factors. And so we're going to try to touch on some of those today. If you've watched the preceding videos, there's 7 keystones. You will see that each one has a very distinct purpose, a very distinct application, and is built in very distinct ways. So there will be a little bit of summary or review today, just in case you haven't seen the videos, but you've maybe watched a bit of them, or you want to see how they all integrate before you dive deeper into them. So there will be bits and pieces that you might have heard before, but then they're going to be integrated in a new way. So in the last few months of life, there are certain dynamic processes at play. Now, we are born with certain things hardwired in our brains. We are born with, I'm not going to go into all of that, but we're born with certain things hardwired. And then what happens after birth begins with soft wiring, and then as neuronal pathways are carved out through duration and intensity and repetition, both positive and negative, those become hardwired over time as well. So in the last month or two of interuterine life, the number one keystone that is operating is that of states. And if you remember, states are made up of 8 aspects, and it's not only a mood, it isn't only a feeling, it isn't only a sensation, it isn't only a memory, it isn't only voice or language, it isn't only behavior. It is a combination of those things in very particular ways that creates a state of being. And everything in life, this is a huge generalization, but it's absolutely true. Everything in life is state dependent. So all learning, whether it's academic or relational or living life on a daily basis, most experience, if not all, is state dependent, because what happens is that in a state, our brains start firing a certain neuronal pathway, and then that gets wired. So back in the 1940s, I think it was, Hebb said, what fires together, wires together. And then later, the phrase, and survives together, was added to that. So in utero, a baby is in a state. It may be an idyllic state. It may be that the mother is healthy, it's been a smooth pregnancy, there haven't been any problems. In utero, the baby doesn't ever have to breathe because oxygen is pumped through its system without it having to breathe. It's a water baby. It never gets hungry because nourishment is always available. It sleeps and moves at will. Its needs are met before they're even felt, which is one of the reasons people yearn to go back into that womb-like state sometimes, is because if it went well, it was very idyllic. And if the pregnancy did not go well, or there are problems of some kind, or challenges for the baby, they're going to be in very different states. We're going to get to that in our next series on wounded development and traumatized development. But a baby is born already having had state experience. And it's born, as you'll learn on the state video, with 5 basic states. By 3 months, there are 6, and by 18 months, there's a very 3-dimensional state architecture. Now, also in the last month or so of interuterine life, implicit memory is operating. And as you learned in that video on memory systems, implicit memory is the encoding of lived experience. It doesn't have to be conscious, it doesn't have to be purposeful. It is literally the soaking in and wiring of lived experience. And when there's the appropriate positive or negative trigger later on, it is retrieved as immediate experience, not as a recall memory. So both states and implicit memory are operating in utero, and then of course become much more active at birth. The third element, the third keystone, is internalization and identification. So also in utero, the baby's been taking in, it's been internalizing its watery environment and the states that it's having, and that's already impacting the personality and the temperament of that baby. Then the baby is born, and now there's a huge rush of experience around the baby, from its parents, from doctors, from nurses, from siblings, from grandparents, from aunts and uncles, from sounds and tastes and touch. And now the baby has to breathe, and now the baby has to nurse or feed on a bottle, and now the baby has to wear clothes, and now the baby, is startled easily. So its states are getting much more complex. And as it's internalizing experience, that becomes a part of its implicit memory system, because remember, it won't have explicit recall memory until the 3rd year of life. So these first 2 years are just a gigantic taking in and incorporating of experience and its meaning. We also begin our identification process, so that if we are cared for by loving others, we are going to identify with that care and that love, and over time we're going to begin to love ourselves and treat ourselves the same way. And those identifications help grow our selfhood. The fourth keystone that occurs is affect regulation. Now, this didn't happen purposefully in utero. It might have happened just in the process of the child growing and developing. But once they're born, babies now have needs. As I said, in utero, their needs were met before they were even felt. The minute they're born, they feel their needs, and they feel them from head to toe. They feel them through what's called eidetic imagery, and they feel them through synesthesia. So eidetic imagery is the internal seeing and feeling and knowing that is as vivid as what is external to us. And synesthesia is the cross-hatching of all of our sensory modalities. So babies can smell the color blue. They can hear a taste. It's really interesting. We tend to lose both of those once we're a little older and in school, but most artists still have both intact. Those people who are creative have those intact. And so you want to nurture those capacities. They're beautiful capacities to have alive within oneself. So affect regulation boils down to the parents reading the child's cues. And when the baby cries, what does that particular cry mean? When the baby squeaks or coos, what does that particular squeak or coo mean? When the baby's fussy versus sobbing, what is the baby asking for? Because of course the baby doesn't have words, has voices online in their cries and their coos and their gurgles, but they don't have language yet. So it's the parents' attunement, their empathic attunement, as they learn their baby, what that baby's nervous system is like, what that baby's personality as it's getting shaped is like, and what that baby needs to be easily soothed. And soothed so that the baby can be aware and engaged in ever-growing ways in the world and the relationships around him or her. That affect attunement and the regulation, meaning that the parents minister to, they take care of that expression of needs and give the baby what the baby needs. That attunement and that provision then also offers the baby something to internalize, wonderful things to identify with. It is encoded in implicit memory for the baby, not in words, but in the feeling of I'm valued, I'm valuable, people love me, they delight in me, they want to take care of me, and it grows all of those wonderful empathic capacities within the baby. And of course, it begins to help the baby regulate the baby's own states over time as the child gets older. The next keystone, the fifth one, is attachment. An insecure attachment, as we learned. The baby may be distressed upon a temporary separation, but is able to stay involved and get soothing by somebody else, and then reunite with that caregiver when they return. So if you have a baby who is affectively regulated and soothed and loved and enjoyed, and they've been able to take all of that in and identify with it, and that's becoming a part of their implicit memory system, and it regulates their states, that is going to support secure attachment, because they know they have parents there, and eventually siblings and grandparents that they can trust, that they know they're going to return to them if they go away temporarily. That builds object constancy, which is the idea that if a parent isn't right there in front of the baby, the parent still exists and is going to return because the baby is valuable to them and important to them. And object constancy you want to see maturing by about 10 to 12 months of age. Object permanence is that even if I get mad at mommy or daddy, I still love them. I still know overall they're good people. I don't lose them completely as a good caregiver. And then eventually object usage, object permanence comes on board between 10 and 18 months, and object usage starts around 18 months to 24 months and matures from there. And that's the ability to have mommy and daddy internalized so that they companion that child, so that by the time the child goes to nursery school, if they fall down on the playground and scrape their knees and are hurt, they are, because of secure attachment, able to get soothing from the teacher. And they also know internally that mommy and daddy are going to be really interested in what happened to them and also offer comfort when they come to pick them up. So you can see how all of these are interrelating. The sixth keystone is hemispheric development. And in the first year of life, we have the capacity to have curiosity and joy and elevation and excitement. And in the second year of life, the inhibitory system is getting wired, which gives us limits and boundaries. And so again, you can see if you have secure attachment where trust is building with caregivers who are empathically attuned and know when to provide, when to excite, and when to calm, and when to limit, all of that gets taken in and internalized by the child, identified with for their own growth of self, and it becomes encoded in implicit memory to use throughout their lifespan and build upon, and it regulates their states and gives them a bountiful sense of self, whatever state they're in. And last but not least is voice and language. That's the seventh keystone of healthy development. And voice begins with that first cry at birth. And how we're responded to supports that voice. And we have lots of ways of expressing voice. We have lots of ways to make our needs known through laughter, through cries, through protests, through squeaks, through coos, through gurgles. And then we begin to get language in the second and third year of life. And if our voice has been supported, by the time we're 3 years old, we will have what's called authorial voice. We have a sense of I-ness, where I think this, I believe this, I want that, I need this. And with that, the child can have personal voice for self-expression and communication with others, and also have the fullness of ever-growing language that is in concert with that voice. And as that voice is heard, that increases hemispheric wiring and communication across the hemispheres from left to right to left hemisphere. It increases attachment, helps support voice because of all of the wonderful things parents can express with their child and vice versa. And then affect regulation becomes a part of words and using language for soothing and care and affection. And then we have all of that getting internalized and identified with, and it's a part of our implicit memory systems, and then it becomes part of our explicit memory systems, and it also becomes encoded in all of our states. So this is, sorry about my puppies barking, Amazon, it must be calling. And this is how these 7 keystones interrelate to one another and build one another. So that's the my model of healthy development of the essential self of every human being. And now we're going to turn to another series of 7 videos on what happens to healthy development when failures or trauma occurs, and then what that does to each of these keystones, and then that interplay. And after that, we'll have another series of what to do about it in current time, either for children, adolescents, or if we are full-on adults, we can still heal our development and progress from right where we are. And I will love being your companion on this journey. Thank you for being with me, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye for now.